Welcome to the Blue Fire Digital Network.
Welcome to the Godly Fathers Podcast, a podcast for young dads trying to live a godly life and raise godly children. I'm your host, Morgan Monroe. Let's get into the dad life. Hello and welcome back to the Godly Fathers Podcast. This is the second real episode. Today we're going to be doing a review for the new Pixar movie, LIGHTYEAR. Might be a weird thing to be doing on this podcast, but let me explain, all right? First off, I enjoy doing movie reviews. I have another YouTube channel called Geek and Seek, and we do a lot of different stuff over there. But one of the things we'll do is we'll review movies and shows and stuff like that. So this is just something I enjoy doing for starters. But, you know, with Disney Plus, I kind of feel like it's supposed to be one of those things that when I have my kids here and they're old enough to just, you know, watch what they want to watch, I feel like Disney Plus is supposed to be something that I should just be allowed to let them do whatever on, for the most part. I mean, there's some stuff on there now that you have to have like a parental lock on. Like, I think the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and I think they got some of the Marvel shows are pretty intense, like the movie Logan or the Punisher show or whatever. But, you know, when I was a kid, I kind of just watched whatever Disney stuff I wanted to watch because there wasn't anything to worry about. But it seems like recently Disney has kind of started pushing a lot of woke narratives and agendas and letting the story fall by the wayside. So we're going to look at the newest Pixar movie, Lightyear, from a couple different perspectives. One, objectively as a movie, like, is it good? Is it not good? But then more importantly, is this a movie that I should be letting my young children watch, mostly from the perspective of the Christian worldview? So that's mostly what we're going to be getting into today. So I will go ahead and apologize that this week and probably the next episode as well, both of those episodes, it's not going to be as good audio as I hopefully will do. I just finished moving recently, but my office space is not anywhere near done. We're doing some construction in there. It still needs painted, and then I'm going to have to set up all of my gear. So I'm just sitting in my bedroom with a crappy little microphone that's not the one I normally use for podcasting. So, yeah, I just apologize. The audio is probably not going to be as good as this in this episode and maybe the next one as well, but rest assured we will get back to the better audio quality in the near future. Yeah, and then a little update about how my dad life is going before we get into the review. My wife is now 25 weeks pregnant as of it is now the first week of August of 2022. And what's really funny is that at that point in the baby's development, Maya, my baby, she is at the point where she can start hearing things from inside of the womb, which is fun because this is like a couple weeks ago and then leading up to now is kind of really the time where people will start encouraging the parents to specifically talk to the womb so that the baby can start getting familiarized with the sound of your voice. Like, the baby could already hear you a little bit before that. But this is really the point where the baby is actually going to start retaining what it hears, and it can hear more clearly now. So this is at the point where now when she is out here in the world and I speak to her, she's going to be like, oh, hey, yeah, I remember you. So that's really cool. But what's funny about that is last weekend, my wife and I, we went to a two-day Christian metal festival, Chains Unchained, which is a great time. I've seen Convictions and Earthgroans a few times now. It was my first time seeing Impending Doom. I got to hang out with the guys from Blue Fire Horizon a little bit. It was a good weekend, but it was really weird timing because this is like, okay, well, now my baby is probably going to remember metal. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. It was like like Maya now being able to hear things pretty clearly in the womb and then going to a Christian metal festival, I thought was pretty funny timing. But yeah, so she is now roughly about 13 inches and over a pound and a half, and growing well. We had a baby appointment pretty recently, and she seemed to be doing quite well. And my wife is also doing quite well. So yeah, that's where we are at in that. Very exciting stuff. I will also apologize that if I have to start and stop this, it's because I still have the issues with my laptop, and my cat won't leave my computer alone. So if she accidentally unplugs it, that happened. All right. Let's go ahead and get into this movie, Lightyear. So a little bit about the movie itself before we get into the nitty-gritties of reviewing it. So Pixar, some of the all-time classic movies from my childhood were Pixar movies, and it was also fun because it used to be there was just like one major Pixar film a year, and it always came out in the summertime, and it always landed within a couple weeks before or after my brother Steven's birthday. So growing up, it was really fun that we would all, as a family, go to see the newest Pixar movie for Steven's birthday. Back then they didn't push social agendas into children's films. So I have these really fond memories of Pixar movies, and a lot of the time when I go to sleep, I just need some background noise. And a lot of the times I'll turn on those old Pixar movies just for familiar background noise. That's it's less distracting to me than like music or something. A lot of these movies still hold up really well. Like Finding Nemo, for example, great movie. What are the first Incredibles film, Monsters Inc. Really the first two, really all the Toy Story movies are pretty good. Most of the Pixar movies are great watches, and even a lot of the sequels and the prequel Pixar movies that they've made are honestly pretty dang good. Like, they're not my favorite. Like Finding Dory, I didn't love it the way that some people did. Monsters University, the prequel to Monsters Inc. What was the other one that was okay? The Incredibles 2. Like, these aren't like my favorite movies or anything, right? But they're still pretty decent films. And I think a big part of what makes Pixar so good is that, yes, they're kids movies, right? Like, they got cutesy animation, the dialogue is relatively simple, the story points are relatively simple. It's made for kids, right? It's made for kids to follow along. But there's a lot of parts that still apply for the adults in the audience, right? So like when these adults are taking their kids to see this new kids movie, the adults will still have fun as well. Whether that is a joke that anyone's going to find funny, or like the story itself just being really good, whatever the case might be, Pixar is really, at its core, I feel like, supposed to just be a fun family experience. So, when we get to Lightyear, it kind of seems like that's shifted. Now, there was debate on maybe it was starting to shift already, like over the last couple years. On Christmas, I think it was 2 years ago, there's a Pixar movie called Soul. And I think Soul is a great movie. Part of it is that I did jazz in college and had a blast. And, that jazz is a decently important part of that movie. And, being a Christian, the afterlife-y stuff is obviously of interest to me because I obviously have my opinions on that. But as good of a movie as Soul was, it does raise all of these really weird questions and scenarios that, like, I don't really know how to explain this to a child. Like, I don't think that a developed human being is going to be corrupted by what life and death means by watching Soul. But can I say the same thing for a child? I don't know. So Soul is already a Pixar movie that I'm like, I don't really know where to go with that. And then Turning Red, which I think came out earlier this year. I don't really remember. Also had some weird stuff in it. Like, the movie was not for me anyways. Like it was really focused on. It's a coming of age story, right? Like this is probably a good movie for like a young girl who is about to, start having her changes to her body that she has as she goes into her, young teens and like I think in that sense it's a fun movie for a girl maybe 9, 10 to just kind of like mentally prepare. Like there really are things that are going to change. You're really going to have these changes, right? The problem with Turning Red, besides just not being for me, which, is fine. I wasn't the target audience, right? But Turning Red seemed to make a lot of people uncomfortable in the sense that it was like normalizing furries, which there was like one thing at the end of the movie where she didn't say like my body, my choice, but she like said something that like implied that. And then she was like, she had control of her panda transformation ability, and she was like walking around as like like in in Avengers Endgame where we got the Professor Hulk now, like he's got control, so he like can take the best of Bruce and the best of the Hulk and put it together. Like that's kind of what she's doing, and she's got like she's a person but walking around with like her real panda tail and real panda ears. And like a lot of people were kind of like saying that was like a normalizing the furries and that's another kind of like weird area where it's like, ooh, yeah, that's kind of icky. But if I'm being honest, I didn't really get that vibe off of it. I've only seen it once, and I honestly don't really plan on watching it again. At least, not planning on going out of my way to watch it again. Unless my daughter ends up wanting to watch it. But I think once you get to that age range where you are still quite impressionable at that age, so that is something to keep in mind. But I think that the overall coming of age part of it is pretty cool, and the mythology that they come up with is kind of fun, childish Disney magic kind of stuff. But so leading up to Lightyear, we had those couple things that parents started paying attention, right? And really over the last couple years, parents have just become more aware. And part of it is that people are getting more radical with pushing their social agendas. That's already happening. Like that's been escalating for the last couple of years anyways. But parents are really noticing it as a result of, over the, I don't want to get flagged, the Rona pandemic situation. Kids were at home with their parents, doing their school over Zoom or whatever else they were doing, and so as a result, parents were hearing some of the things that their teachers were saying, or like, wait, you're writing about what? And people are just becoming more aware of the social agendas that are being forced, and it's awesome and powerful and inspiring to see a lot of parents taking stands against that, and even in like places who are like on average a little more liberal and all for the social agendas, like even in places where that's more normal, people are like, okay, but these are my kids, and at the end of the day, I'm the person who's supposed to parent them. It's not the school's job to parent my kids. It's not society's job to parent my kids and teach my kids right and wrong. That's my job. So it's really, and especially with the sexualization of children that's been going on, it's like parents are really standing up against that and being like, my 8-year-old doesn't need to know all of the 8 trillion different genders and why they mean this or that. My 8-year-old needs to know how to do math and how to read and how grammar works. Like those are the things that the school is supposed to be doing. And then as it comes up, I as the parent am supposed to teach them that other stuff, right? So Lightyear's here, right? We're finally getting to the meat and potatoes. Lightyear's here. It did have a theatrical release, which there were a couple Disney films that Didn't get that recently, because of theaters being closed and whatnot. But it did have a theatrical release. And a lot of people did not go see it. From what I could gather, and I was only able to find a couple different sources on this, so I don't know to what extent this is true. But for theatrical Pixar releases, Lightyear had the lowest attendance. And if you look at the numbers, that's probably true. Where to go? I have it pulled up on my phone. So the movie had a budget of $200 million. It baffles me how much money it takes to make a film. I guess it's animated, and the animation honestly is pretty decent. And opening weekend, which is where movies tend to make their most money, it only brought in $50 million. So it ended up grossing worldwide, while in theaters $222 million, which that's a lot of money, except for the fact that you think about it, and that means it really only profited $22 million. Which proportionately is not, it's not great, especially for a Pixar film. Pixar films tend to do a lot better than that. Disney movies in general tend to do a lot better than that. And then I tend to like IMDb a lot more than Rotten Tomatoes. I feel like if you like Rotten Tomatoes because of like the audience score, that's fine, because anyone who just happens to be like they feel like they need to give their feedback on a movie, like they're just gonna be honest. Like the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is probably fine, but the critics' review are nonsensical. It tends to be a lot of pushing woke agendas. Like the most recent example I can think of this is The Terminal List, featuring Chris Pratt, Amazon Prime original series. And it is blown up. It is like tons and tons of people have watched it. Tons of people have subscribed to Amazon Prime just so they can watch it. And it overall has a really good review. Like the audience seems to love it. But Rotten Tomatoes gave it like a 14, and because like critics were like, this is why people shouldn't have guns, and just nonsensical stuff like that. So I can't use Rotten Tomatoes. So I use IMDb. Because I feel like the first off, the critic score and the user score, they tend to be a little closer together, and then more people seem, and I don't know how. I don't think this is a one-for-one comparison, but it seems like more average people are willing to leave reviews on IMDb than on Rotten Tomatoes, and so what you end up getting is something of whatever the score is that IMDb shows. Tends to be a little bit more in the ballpark of how the movie probably really deserves as far as a score. So I like to use IMDb. So anyways, IMDb on average has a 5.7 for Lightyear out of 10. That's terrible. Now, there are plenty of movies that I have seen with bad reviews, and I've been like, yeah, that was okay. But on average, I feel like the sweet spot is like the 6.8 to 8.5. Like that general ballpark means that it's probably good somewhere. I mean, and that's a decent amount of grace that you're giving it, right? But if it's lower than a 6.5, it's probably not good. And if it's higher than an 8.5, it's probably artsy fartsy, and it's probably not good for that reason. So how did that happen? When the movie came out, there's a couple of great YouTube channels. If you like movie reviews and like behind the scenes stuff of like how movies came to be and stuff like that, two really great YouTube channels that you should check out: Looper and Screen Rant. Well, and my own YouTube channel, Geek and Seek, obviously. But a lot of people were talking about Lightyear when it first came out because it didn't do well. And everyone knew that it wasn't doing well. And what was baffling to me is that in conservative circles, people knew why it wasn't doing well and why they weren't taking their kids to go see it. But no one was talking about that part. They were coming up with other reasons that the movie wasn't doing well. A lot of Disney's income for theatrical releases comes from China. And because one of the main characters is black, they were blaming it on that because the Chinese are just very racist, I guess. So having a black woman lead as one of the main characters was like a big no-go. So like they were like saying stuff like that, or like people were like, oh, people were just mad that Tim Allen didn't come back as Buzz, which I would have preferred that, obviously. I think that Tim Allen is Buzz Lightyear. With that said, I don't think that Chris Evans did a bad job as Buzz Lightyear. It's just that, and I think that there is some truth to this. Some of the reviews I read kind of were in line with this. I think a lot of people just don't really care for Chris Evans. I think he tends to come off as monotone or one-dimensional or just kind of boring. And then apparently he's also just kind of a jerk in real life, but I try not to let that persuade me too much about whether or not I do or don't like a movie or show, because like everyone knows Tom Cruise is the worst in real life, but I'd also be lying if I said that I didn't really like most of the Mission Impossible movies, right? So I try not to let that be like a huge deciding factor. But the main thing that I was hearing in conservative circles, primarily, a lot in the Christian community as well, was a lot of parents weren't taking their kids to see this movie because of a lesbian couple being in the movie. And to the extent where Lightyear is actually blocked in the Middle East. In the Middle East, if you have Disney Plus, you cannot watch Lightyear because of that. Now, going into it, I thought, I mean, is it like just like an implied thing, or is it like, no, they just straight up say it? Because if it's just implied, I feel like it kind of just is what it is, and it wouldn't have probably bothered people as much as it did. But I know that our black lead that we have, Alicia Hawthorne, in the first part of the movie is she's like one of the commanders, and she's friends with Buzz Lightyear. And I know that there's like some weird time flux kind of situation going on, kind of like Interstellar. Great film, by the way. Where I know that Izzy Hawthorne, her granddaughter, then kind of takes up that new mantle as that. It goes from being Buzz's colleague and someone who Buzz kind of even looks up to then being her granddaughter, who is now kind of a rookie, having to be taken up under Buzz's arm. But then, because it's a kids movie and people got to learn their lessons, she also teaches Buzz some things along the way. Now, in that situation, it's like, okay, well, she has a granddaughter. That means she had a kid, which then means that they had a kid. So before even seeing the movie, my logic was, okay, so it's probably that the granddaughter is in the same-sex relationship. That would be my assumption. But no. Upon watching it, it turns out that it is Alicia, who is actually the lesbian. So there's even a scene where you see Alicia's wife, who she doesn't have any speaking parts in the movie. So I don't think where she is pregnant with Alicia. So I think the thing that then becomes problematic for kids is because kids ask a lot of questions, and it comes down to how, right? Because kids kind of figure out early on that mom and dad, boom, equal baby. But when it's mom and mom, where does baby come from, right? And how do you really... there are people who will just say, well, kids, we took some random guy's sperm and got pregnant off of it, So, surprise, you're actually only biologically one of your parents' kids. You could do that. But it just seems weird, and that's going to, when your child finds that out, because kids aren't stupid. They are stupid, but they're smarter than you give them credit for, eventually, say you're that kid, right? And you got two moms, or you got two dads, whatever. eventually you're going to kind of come to the conclusion that, like, okay, I can't be both of these people biological child. That doesn't make sense. And so that's going to end up causing some weird tension in your family dynamic. And you already kind of see that. Like, people who, like, now that same-sex marriages have kind of been around long enough, we're starting to see the longish terms effects. Like, it hasn't been normalized for long enough that we really can say with too much certainty how these kids are growing up. But we're starting to see some stuff, and it's not great. A lot of these kids are having depression. They have problems within their family. They tend to have commitment issues. They tend to also not... They're usually also not straight, or they struggle with their sexuality, if nothing else. It tends to not be great. And that's something that we should be concerned. Our kids shouldn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Our kids should worry about being kids. Our kids should be worried about having fun and doing things that kids do. Kids go to school, they learn, they come home, they play with their friends, they have dinner with their family, rinse and repeat, right? They're probably going to, like, hopefully you got them in like a Bible study kind of thing on Sunday mornings, or, hopefully they're playing a sport, or, something. Like, kids need to just worry about being kids. They don't need to be worried about social agendas that go against God's design and how that should affect them and how that should affect how they treat other people, right? Now, obviously, you should be teaching your kids grace and kindness, right? We shouldn't, like... Just because people live their life a different way than you doesn't mean that you should judge them. It doesn't mean you should be mean to them or anything like that, right? That's how you should treat your kid. That's how you should raise your kids to be. You should teach them to treat people the way that they would want to be treated. It's the golden rule. I feel like I'm starting to go in a circle here, so I'm going to start moving on here. But I hope that kind of clears some things up. That's like, even though a lot of the major people weren't talking about, like, that's part of why Lightyear didn't do well, that is a big thing. That's, like, the main thing. Like, if you read the reviews, that is an overwhelming, like, there's a ton of people who, like, they weren't taking their kids because they didn't want to have these conversations with their kids, or they didn't want to have this kind of confusion introduced into their life while they're in such a like, impressionable age of development. That was a huge part of it. So let's go ahead and get into the rest of the movie. If you're... I will say I'm not really going to beat behind the bush with this review. So if this is a movie you want to see, maybe you don't listen to the end of the podcast yet. It's only an hour and 40 minutes. If you really want to see it, you can. But I'm not going to... Like, I'm going to talk here, and there are going to be spoilers here. So you've been warned. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now that I don't think it's worth your time. But if the spoilers really bother you, this is your part to click off and come back after you've watched the movie. So the thing with this movie is that I hate time travel so much. I hate that that's how the biggest part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe ended, was Endgame. I would have rathered a lot of those characters just stay dead instead of bringing them back with time travel or whatnot. And I just mentioned Interstellar, and I think Interstellar is a great film. It's a fun watch. It talks about some interesting concepts. But the whole time travel-ish part is really weird. Now, in Interstellar, a lot of that stuff isn't actual time travel, but more of that time is relative to your place in the universe, which, if we were supposed to really go into the physics of that, that is something that is probably true. So that part doesn't bother me. It's kind of a big brain thing. But the Lightyear is borrowing a lot from that. Lightyear is borrowing a lot of its narrative from Interstellar, which one kind of makes it feel a little unoriginal, which doesn't help when you have a boring lead like Chris Evans. So weird weird move. But that part of it I don't mind so much. But then we get to the climax of the big reveal of who the big baddie is. So for us who have seen Toy Story, we know that Zurg is like the big bad guy, right? Or like I have a friend who was like, we didn't need a Lightyear movie. We know of Lightyear's origin stories because there was that animated Buzz Lightyear thing in like early 2000s. And, so we have Zurg as this main bad guy. And in Toy Story 2, they kind of do like a riff off of Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, where I'm pretty sure it's like Zurg is like Buzz Lightyear's father or something. And it's kind of a funny scene when, it's kind of a parody of Star Wars, But in this, they kind of make that joke. Like the Zurg costume opens up and it looks like an old Buzz Lightyear. And then Buzz goes, "Dad?" It's like, haha, no, I'm you from 50 years in the future. And I was like, oh no, they did it. They did the time travel thing. No. So basically the premise, so here's the general outline, right? I just needed to get that off my chest because I've been thinking about it and it's stressing me out and I hate it. I hate time travel so much. It's lazy writing. So they're space traveling and they're setting up a new colony for humans to live on another planet. Is basically the premise. They land on this planet to explore it to see if it's a good option. Turns out it's not. So they try to escape, but they crash the ship. So now they're stuck here. So they're there for a year, setting up, trying to get off this planet, and they are trying to recreate this fuel that they need in order to get to light speed to get to a different planet. So Buzz Lightyear, he takes the fuel out for a test drive, and it doesn't work. He doesn't quite get up to light speed. But because of the path he took, there was a weird thing in relativity where to him it only felt like he was gone for a few minutes, but then back on that planet, he was actually gone for 4 years. So yeah, it's borrowing a lot from Interstellar. So it's a big brain thing in a kid's movie. So get ready to teach your kids about physics that you yourself probably don't quite understand. Yeah. Anyways, so that's kind of the setup, right? So they keep testing it, right? Over and over and over again, and it ends up being like 60 years go by or something, I think. And so like every time Buzz comes back, it's another 4 years, and he goes back out. And so he kind of gets to see his friend grow old, have her family pass away. But eventually he comes back, and it seems like it worked. It seems like the fuel finally worked. But when he gets back, the planet's kind of gone to crap because Zurg shows up and is, wreaking havoc. So Zurg is trying to get the fuel from Buzz. Now, I rewound the scene in the movie where 50 years in the future Buzz Lightyear is talking to our current Buzz Lightyear about needing the fuel to basically reset the timeline so that he can go back and be with his friend again. Because her friend felt sad that she never got to go back into space because, that's why she got into the Space Ranger program. And I rewound that scene multiple times looking for more answers. And if they were there, I didn't get it. Like, I think part of why people like writing time travel stories is because you have freedom, right? Like, it's all theoretical science. And a lot of it's just mumbo jumbo. Like, a lot of the people who are writing these kind of stories, they don't actually know anything about physics. They don't actually know about whether or not this is something that we might be able to do someday. Like, they just really don't know. Which the problem in that is that then sometimes you just straight up don't get your answers as to how. And so I remember sitting through the last 30 minutes of the movie just being completely unsatisfied. And that was a bummer. Now, the movie ends with they blow up Zurg's ship and they bring the fuel back. Or it got destroyed, I think. I think it actually got destroyed. But basically he's like, you know what? It just is what it is. it seems like we're really going to be able to live on this planet after all. Obviously, if they survive 60 years while he's jumping through time. And he kind of goes off and starts his own new space program. So it's only an hour 40 runtime, and it's at the same time, I don't really want them to dedicate more time to explaining the time travel part of the movie or the time relativity part of the movie, right? Because anyone who watched Interstellar probably kind of gets what they're talking about. But the problem is isn't this supposed to be a kids movie, or is it? Because if it is a kids movie, this doesn't make any sense. So here's the ultimate takeaway for the movie, right? Is that I don't know who this movie is supposed to be for. Because tonally, it is quite dark, and the physics concepts are a big part of the overall plot, which is then confusing for children. It's confusing for adults, let alone the kids. So, like, who is this movie for? It doesn't seem like... It's also quite violent, I should add. There have been, like, violent scenes in Pixar movies before, right? Like The Incredibles. The Incredibles was the first PG-rated Pixar movie, just because, it's superhero. So, they have to have a bad guy, and there's going to be stuff that gets blown up, and people get hurt, and, So, like, I'm not saying that Pixar and Disney, they shouldn't make things for kids that have violent stuff going on. I mean, Star Wars, as much as I love Star Wars is for kids. It's supposed to be for kids. So I don't mind that so much, really. In the grand scheme of things, but like when I think Pixar, I think like these cutesy art styles and these bright colors, and it doesn't have that at all. It's very grayscale and dark, and the movie is honestly a little on the slow side. Now, if the movie ended up being like 2 hours long or something, then I don't think that all of these like slower moments where we can just breathe and get to know the characters and understand how characters are feeling, I don't think that would feel so bad. But when the movie is already pretty short, I think we expect a lot to be happening in a short period of time, and we don't quite get there, which is kind of a bummer. Because honestly, the as far as like the animation style itself, I actually think the action scenes are pretty decent. But again, it's who is this for? Because again, like this is like the opposite. What earlier in the podcast I mentioned, what makes Pixar movies so great is that it's supposed to be fun for the whole family. Like, yes, it's for kids, but there's stuff sprinkled in there that the parents are going to enjoy. This kind of seems like the opposite thing. This seems like it is made for adults, but supposed to have funny side characters for the kids. It seems backwards. So I don't get it. And I think that seems to be kind of the general consensus. Like, even if we ignore the social agendas that Disney seems to be further pushing on kids, which there's even leaked footage from inside the Disney board meetings where they're like, "Yep, we're ready to start pushing more sexual agendas into kid movies." Like, that's leaked information that, like, okay, that's something we're going to need to keep our eye out on now. I thought that, Disney was a safe place where I could, set my kids in front of the Disney Channel and not worry about them. No, I guess that's not going to be true moving forward. I'm even going to have to filter that. So that's a bummer. But that seems to just be the overall consensus. Even if we put that aside, the problem with the movie is that it's just tonally off. It seems like it's an adult movie with jokes and side characters who are designed to entertain children, which parents probably don't like. So I had a friend who was arguing that the movie is really for people who grew up with Toy Story, and then they could have some background to one of the main characters, which is fine, I guess. I don't know why that's necessary, but I wouldn't be mad about that. It just doesn't really seem like that's actually the case. It just seems like a cash grab, and it seems like it wasn't quite thought through. as far as the tone of it all. I think if we had actually made it more of the traditional Pixar storyline where it's made for kids, but the story is good enough that the adults will still enjoy it, or the jokes are just generally funny and not just like kid funny, I think it could have been decent. But again, it kind of seems like a switch. So let's kind of get down to the meat and potatoes of this. The reason that you guys have sat here for 40 minutes while I rant is, should I allow my kids to watch this movie? And I think ultimately it's going to depend on how old your kids are. I think, because really, if we're really just talking about like morally, is this something that is going to is it going to cause problems with your kids in development? I don't think a 12-year-old is going to have any problem watching this movie. But young kids, I wouldn't let them watch it. And I hate to say that it's because of the very, very minor lesbian scene. I mean, that's honestly, it's so minor. It really shouldn't make a big deal. But it opens up the floodgates to all of these hard conversations and hard questions that you're going to have to answer. And it's going to start changing how your child views other people in the world, right? And again, you need to teach your kids grace and teach your kids that, yeah, there are obviously going to be people who are different than you and have different morals and all of that. It's important for your kid to understand that. But when they see it in a movie that is targeted for children, they're going to start thinking that's normal. And it shouldn't be the normal. I mean, percentage-wise, the LGBTQP, like that, they make up a very small portion of the population. They just happen to be very loud and proud. So, yes, your children should know that those people exist, but we shouldn't treat it as normal, because then, again, all of these questions are going to start coming up about how your child is going to have to understand what normal actually is. Your child's going to struggle to understand that God designed marriage to be between a man and his wife, and that is the family unit. Because there are amazing things that God made men to do that women can't do as well, and then vice versa. There are things that my wife does way better than I can do. Like that, there's a give and take and a complementaryism. That's not how you say that word. They complement each other. That is supposed to come in a symbiotic marriage, the way that God designed it. And that's what we should teach kids, is the normal. Now, there's obviously nothing, like, that's the one thing about the movie that, like, is like, questionable. Everything else is, like, yeah, it's tonally dark and there's some action, but it's not, like, it's not gross or anything, right? There's no gore. There's, the side characters are honestly quite entertaining, as far as, like, standards for a children's film. Like, there's an old lady who's on parole. She's pretty funny, and like the cat robot's pretty amusing. But yeah, I mean, the real question is, why would you want to watch this movie? It's just kind of boring. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on the matter. If this is something you guys would like me to do again, let me know. Reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram at the Godly Fathers Podcast, or if you are, I don't know if any of the streaming places where you can hear this, I don't know if there's a way for you to comment on that, but reach out to me and let me know if this is something you would like me to do again, or if there's a specific movie you would like me to review in the perspective of the Christian walk and raising your kids, as far as, is this movie appropriate for kids or not. If you give me suggestions, give me serious suggestions, though. Like, don't be like, can my kid watch Nightmare on Elm Street? No. No, they cannot. Give me real answers if that's something you want to do. And then if this is also just something you enjoy me doing anyways, check out my YouTube channel, Geek and Seek. And, that's one of the main things we do over there is movie reviews. Though we do talk about it more in broader perspectives of objectively, is this movie good or not, and what we do or don't like about it. And for the Christian movie reviews, come here. All right. But yeah, this is something that I had fun doing some research on and talking to you guys about. So I will gladly do this again if it's something that you guys are interested in. Otherwise, I will see you guys in a couple weeks with another episode. See you later. Thank you for listening to the Godly Fathers Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, head over to anchor.fm/The Godly Fathers Podcast to make a donation. Make sure to follow our podcast and leave a positive review, as well as share it with a friend who you think might like it. You can keep up to date with us on Facebook and Instagram at The Godly Fathers Podcast. The song used in the intro and outro of this podcast is The Pit by my band Tundra. And until next time, have a great couple of weeks, and God bless.